Where are the calls for Egypt to open its border and provide humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians across the border, in the Sinai, in Egyptian Rafah, where they can be provided with assistance without diversion to Hamas and in compliance with Egypt's obligations under international law, its obligations that it signed up to under the African Union Convention on Refugees. That is why I say that the term parasite is applicable, because if people actually cared about Palestinians as I do, they would have been calling from October 2023 for Egypt to facilitate that so that these Palestinian civilians can be provided for.
So look here, let me read you parts of the Genocide Code, and then we'll talk about whether it's intent. The legal term genocide refers to, and then I'm getting this from, I believe, the Holocaust Museum's site. First, a certain acts committed with the intent to destroy whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And it has 5 components. 2 of them clearly don't apply here, but 3, I believe, do. Killing members of the group, certainly the case here. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the groups obviously applies here. And deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. That's part of why Srebrenica was clearly a genocide, even though there was only 8,300 or so people killed, because they were clearly targeting the Bosnian Muslims that were in that area, and they were killing them in whole or in part, and it was their intent. So we go back to at least 30 times the number of civilians. So in order for you to think that there is no intent, you have to think one of 2 things. One, the IDF is the most incompetent military in the history of all militaries. They just can't shoot straight. I mean, they bomb and they bomb and they bomb. Every time in the beginning, at least for the first 9, 10 months or so, they just couldn't get any of the Hamas leaders. Interestingly, they knew exactly where they were later, and they knew exactly where the Hezbollah leaders were later, and they knew exactly how to target on pagers and walkie-talkies with incredible precision. And when they killed Nasrallah, they knew exactly where he was, and they pinpointed that area, and they killed him. They killed civilians on that day too, but at least they knew where he was and they got him. But for the first 9 or 10 months, nearly carpet bombing, bomb after bomb after bomb, and they just kept missing and missing and missing and missing. One of the hostages said when they returned, we couldn't believe they were bombing the buildings. We were in the building. What were they doing? And yet they just couldn't find any Hamas leaders until they wanted to, and then they found them all. So you can say, okay, no, I just think they're just terrible at their job. They just don't know how to find anyone. They didn't have intent. They meant well. Really, they meant well? Or the second possibility is that you would say, well, look, they did the best they could. Well, let me ask you about that. Let's say that someone killed someone that you know and that you love. I mean, I'd be super angry, and I'd want to get that person. I get that instinct. Now they tell you, you can get that person. There's just 29 other people in that building, and you have to kill them all. Do you think that it is not intent to kill those 29 to get to the one? Because, well, there was nothing I could do. I had to get that one guy, so I had to kill everyone else in the building, and that doesn't count as intent. And what if they said to you, you don't do it with a bomb, because that seems easy. It seems like a video game. Of course, not on the business end of it. When it lands on you, it either burns you alive or crushes your skull. Again, picture, because guys, this is not hypothetical. It's happening today. So over 2,300 people killed in Lebanon, over 100 kids killed in Lebanon, 20 killed just today. Okay, let alone Gaza, let alone West Bank, let alone Syria, let alone the attacks on Iran. So all of this military expansion and land acquisition, but our intent is pure. So I ask you, would you have killed the other 29? And what if you had to do it by hand? What if, oh, that's a 3-year-old. I'm going to shoot him in the head. Young mom, I'm going to strangle them to death. I mean, that's horrific. You would never do that, right? But you would drop a bomb and say, I have no intent, I'm innocent. No, I think that is clearly intent. So couple more here. When I was defending the Armenian genocide, I would say, we were just moving them to safety. And we gave them plenty of warning. And as I read about Srebrenica, you know what they said? We were just moving them for their own safety. And we gave them a 24-hour warning. We said, either move or we're going to kill you. And Israel says, well, hey, either move or we're going to kill you. It's textbook. It's textbook genocide. And then the last one, I would say, well, we didn't kill them all. There were a lot of Armenians in Western Turkey. We didn't touch them at all. We just had to move those guys out of the way. By the way, you look through genocide after genocide, same exact rationalizations. Trail of Tears. Well, we just had to move them because they were in the wrong place. We're getting them to safety. I mean, we killed tons of them on their way to so-called safety. But again, we have no intent. When they kill, they have complete intent, and the 1,200 people are the most precious people on earth. But on the other side, when we kill 30 times, and that's taking the IDF numbers, which are outrageous, but even if you take the IDF numbers, we kill 30 times. We kill 457 times the number of children. But trust us, we either have no intent or we don't care much about your children. And that's a super hard reality to deal with. And one of the things that I hope we walk away with at the end here is, both for the sake of the Palestinians and the Israelis, they have got to turn around. If they don't turn around, Israel is going to make everyone in the world hate them. And I don't want that for anyone. It's a terrible idea. Please stop.
Ms. Hausdorff, you have 10 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful to the Federalist Society, to our hosts at UCLA, Professor Steinberg, Zipperstein. I'm grateful for the invitation to come and speak about the International Criminal Court. And I'm only sorry that the ICC has not yet featured in this event so far. On the contrary, we've had a reprehensible moral equivalence being drawn between the two sides to the conflict, specifically in Gaza. One, an internationally prescribed terrorist organization, Hamas, that carried out those atrocities on the 7th of October, and the other, the only democracy in the Middle East, and the IDF, an army that sets itself apart from every other in the history of warfare with its application of international humanitarian law. And what's extremely concerning about that moral equivalence is that it is ultimately at the center of all of the misinformation which we have just heard and which is propagated in particular for the last 13 months, and which has been the cause of a surge in anti-Semitism, the like of which hasn't been seen since the Second World War. A surge in anti-Semitism which has turned violent across Europe only in the last months. Now, it's interesting that my opponent has referred to his previous errors with respect to the Armenian genocide. In fact, he has said my mistake at the time was confusing myself for a scholar of history, which I certainly am not. I'm afraid he's also proven this evening that he is certainly no scholar of law. And when we talk about the International Criminal Court, I hope to come on to some law. But first, this reprehensible canard of genocide, which has been mentioned again this evening, the modern blood libel, which, like ethnic cleansing, apartheid, colonialism, turns international law on its head and blames the real victims of these crimes for the crimes that were perpetrated against them. I don't just mean the victims of genocide in the Holocaust, which gave rise to the term, coined by Raphael Lemkin to provide a legal lexicon to being perpetrated against the Jews, exterminating them for being Jews. I also mean the acts of genocide perpetrated by Hamas, Palestinian and Islamic Jihad, and other Palestinian terrorists on the 7th of October. The idea that anyone with an ounce of knowledge of international law would approach these issues on the effects-based analysis that we have heard so far demonstrates a total lack of knowledge, indeed ignorance, as to how international humanitarian law works, which is based on intent and not effects. And then to compound that pseudo-analysis by reference to Hamas figures, an internationally prescribed terrorist organization, figures that have been parroted, unfortunately, by international media, and that are contributing to the perpetuation of this conflict. Because the reason what we have heard is so problematic is that it is playing into the hands of Hamas, whose only aim currently is to survive, and their mechanism of doing so is with mouthpieces that promote their false numbers, that promote the false information about Israel's approach and attitude to international humanitarian law, and that promote falsehoods about the current situation. We only need to hear what Gazans themselves have to say. And Ohad Hemo from Channel 12 in Israel went into Gaza only a couple of days ago. I wrote down a few of the quotes of those he interviewed. May God take revenge on those who uprooted us and killed us in our own homes. Hamas. Hamas has wounded us and killed us. They are responsible for all the destruction. All the destruction is on them. May God settle the score with Hamas, take revenge on Hamas, they destroyed our lives, both Israeli and Palestinian lives, destroyed by Hamas and encouraged by the falsehoods and the rhetoric that we have already heard this evening. Now, the International Criminal Court, established by the Rome Statute in 1998, was charged with bringing perpetrators of mass atrocities to justice. It has an abysmal record, ladies and gentlemen. In 2012, it was resoundingly criticized for spending nearly $1 billion and taking 10 years to deliver its first conviction. And matters have worsened further still. In 2020, there was an independent expert review of the court, and that review spoke of a workplace culture characterized by bullying and a climate of extreme fear created by the ICC's own leadership. It's resoundingly criticized also for focusing almost exclusively on African defendants and for the pitiful number of successful prosecutions that it has been able to bring. So what better means of rehabilitating oneself, of cleansing oneself in the public eye, than going after the world's punching bag, the only Jewish state? Now, the anti-Israel agenda at the ICC is not new. Even at the drafting of the statute, with the insertion of Article B, a crime, supposedly, that was drafted especially to seek to criminalize the presence of Jews in Judea and Samaria, in carrying the wording of Article 49.6 over from the Fourth Geneva Convention, the drafters accepted the insertion of additional words indirectly or directly. The only state to be explicitly targeted with pseudo-international law being woven into the Rome Statute was Israel, and by all accounts it was a key reason that neither the United States nor Israel decided to join the court. What an indictment of this political institution. Now, what is critical is jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is what distinguishes a legal institution from a political institution. It is the question that gives a court its legitimacy. And when we come to the first ruling that is relevant to a discussion of Israel at the ICC, this is Pre-Trial Chamber 1 and the decision in 2021, which facilitated the previous prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, to open an investigation supposedly against these alleged Israeli crimes, we see an absolute abrogation of the court's responsibility to apply international law, a majority decision that was heavily criticized by the presiding judge, Judge Kovacs, in his 163-page dissent. He said, "I find neither the majority's approach nor its reasoning appropriate in answering the question before the chamber, and in my view, they have no legal basis in the Rome Statute, and even less so in public international law." I mean, in judge speak, that's as bad as it gets. The ignoring of applicable international law, the use of political instruments by that majority decision, UN resolutions included, to justify its position, and riding roughshod over the question of jurisdiction, all of which were resoundingly criticised by member states, including the Czech Republic, Austria, Australia, Hungary, Germany, Brazil, Uganda, and numerous experts in international law, some of whom are with us this evening. So the jurisdiction of the court, let's be clear about this, can only be delegated to it by member states. Israel is not a party to the ICC, and the state of Palestine does not exist. It is unable to comply with the basic requirements of the Montevideo Convention criteria, including a permanent, defined territory, effective government capacity to enter international relations. But perhaps most astonishingly, the pre-trial chamber in 2021 refused even to consider the application of applicable law, including the Oslo Accords, which under Article 17.2c and Annex 4, Article 1.2, expressly provide that Israel has sole criminal jurisdiction. So the only way that the supposed accession by the Palestinian Authority to the ICC could possibly have even been argued to take place is undermined by the very document, the very international agreement that created the Palestinian Authority in the first place. The list of legal flaws in the pre-trial chamber's decision is extensive, but it pales to insignificance next to the application for arrest warrants, which we had on the 20th of May this year, which is done on the absence of jurisdiction, without reference to the principle of complementarity, the founding principle of the court, which means that its jurisdiction is only exercised as a complement to national jurisdiction, not as a substitute and based on a series of false allegations. My organisation, UK Lawyers for Israel, has proven that every phrase of every sentence contained in the prosecutor's public statement explaining his grounds for the application for warrants is false. This is an indictment, ladies and gentlemen, on the International Criminal Court, which is enforcing all of the falsehoods that we heard without legal basis to them already this evening. And that is an indictment on international law generally. It should worry every single individual who cares about the rule of law, because with what starts with Israel, I promise will be unlikely to end with the Jewish state.
Thank you, both speakers. I'm now going to ask a few questions. The first question I'm going to ask is for Mr. Uygur to respond to the argument that has been advanced about whether the ICC has jurisdiction over Israelis. Ms. Hausdorff has just argued it is pre-trial shame of partial dissent. Judge Kovacs argued that the Oslo Accords remain in effect and must be considered. That Oslo Treaty provides in part that the Palestinian Authority has no criminal jurisdiction over Israelis. What then is the theory of ICC jurisdiction to try Israelis?
Okay, so let's address this in a couple of parts. Again, I'm largely a layman here, but I think it's very easy to understand. So number one, the argument that was put forward was, well, they have no jurisdiction because Palestine doesn't exist. Well, there's a very good reason for that. That's because Israel is not allowing it to exist. While they loudly complain, theoretically, hypothetically, some Palestinians might not want Israel to exist. They say, we will not allow you to exist, and then we'll use it against you at the United Nations and say, since we blocked you from existing, well, you have no jurisdiction here. Absurd, ridiculous. By the way, if you don't know, the Knesset voted in July. It was, let's see here, I think it was 68-9, and all 9 nay votes were from the Arab parties. Everyone in the Knesset that was not Arab voted to say that, quote, we firmly oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state. So they say, we block you from getting the state physically, we block you at the United Nations, we block you in every conceivable way, and then we are shocked to find out that you are resisting. When are you going to know that you are ruled and have no power, no laws, nothing that can help you? You go to the United Nations, as we did, to become a state, and we declare it invalid. Wait a minute, when the United Nations was declaring Israel a state, it was perfectly valid. But at the time, Israel did not exist. So by her definition, Israel could not have gone to the UN. They didn't have jurisdiction. They didn't exist. I mean, look, we can take an extreme example. Let's say Mussolini. If he was around now and he started killing people and he's a fascist, etc., and he said, well, good news, I didn't sign up to the ICC. So there's nothing you can do. I can kill and kill and kill and occupy and oppress and do everything I want. But as long as I don't allow you to exist and I didn't sign off to the ICC, I'm above the law. Is this what the ICC is supposed to be for? Is this what the United Nations is supposed to be for? That we say, if you have enough power and you oppress enough and you occupy enough and you erase the other side enough, we will help your cause and erase them for you and say they have no rights at all because you blocked them from existing. Is that the point of the loss? Is that the defense? We have a technical defense of the slaughter and the genocide because technically we didn't allow you to exist in the first place. And by the way, Smotrich now saying they're going to annex the West Bank. What part of self-defense is I take your land?
Ms. Hausdorff, you may respond.
Thank you. Well, I have to break it to you, but I'm afraid it's not how international law works to say we can throw the rule book out of the window, the very jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, the basis upon which states interact with each other. And that way lies chaos, but it is the ultimate consequence of the lawfare initiatives which we have seen. But far more important than that, it seems, in the context of tonight's debate, I can see that there is little desire to grapple with the issues at the International Criminal Court, and in particular the Oslo Accords, which is what was presented in terms of the question. I've already addressed the impact that they have. They rule out any ability for the court to entertain even an investigation, let alone applications, for Israelis or Hamas. This is a court that has no jurisdiction. But what's even more worrying is the misinformation and the blood libels that we've heard tonight of slaughter and genocide. And they are simply being repeated. And the consequences are clear in the incitement that those sorts of falsehoods are having against Jews around the world. As the only person up here, I believe, who's actually been into Gaza in September with the 162nd Division to witness with my own eyes the challenges that the IDF are facing, let me tell you that the applicable international humanitarian law, the principle of necessity, the principle of distinction, the principle of proportionality, and the principle of precaution are applied in a way that no other army has managed in order to reduce civilian casualties as much as possible. Don't believe the false figures that are being presented that do not differentiate between civilians and combatants, do not indicate how these people have been killed. Those quotes I read out to you from ordinary Gazan civilians who've been shot in the streets by Hamas, who've been bombed as they have been seeking to flee areas on Israeli instruction, bombed by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, seeking to hold on to those civilian shields. These are the people that are being thrown under the bus. There is a reason that Mossad Hassan Youssef recently used the term parasite about people who pretend to support the Palestinian cause while spreading these malicious falsehoods about Israel's approach. Because these people profit off of the Palestinian suffering. They have made a business model of playing to the gallery of anti-Semites around the world. And these falsehoods have no basis in the realities on the ground or in the applicable international law. It is plain that Israel exercises precautions, gives warnings of strikes, provides humanitarian assistance, which is in fact far in excess of the calorie requirements in each individual case. And it's a matter of public record. It's an absolute shame that this is not given more coverage by certain, let's say, media outlets.
Thank you. Next question. At least 3 of the charges sought against Netanyahu and Gallant are based on a premise of Israel having starved people in Gaza. Other charges include willful killing and murder and intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population. Has the Israeli government in fact starved Palestinians, engaged in willful killing or murder, or intentionally directed attacks against a civilian population? And this question is addressed first to Ms. Hausdorff.
Well, I'm glad for the opportunity to address this canard of starvation. It is again the subject of a detailed report by UK Lawyers for Israel, which has proven on the basis even of subsequent reports that these allegations and warnings of starvation are as false as all of the other absurd allegations that we've heard from the other side of the table this evening. COGAT's latest updates, let me be clear, COGAT is the unit of the Israeli Defense Forces whose sole responsibility is the provision of humanitarian assistance to civilians in armed conflict. They provide updates on a regular basis as to the level of aid going in. As of last week, 58,846 aid trucks had been admitted into Gaza post-inspection to make sure that they are not carrying additional arms and munitions to resupply Hamas in its efforts to slaughter further Israeli civilians. That's 1,116,025 tons of aid. Now, the reports that were put forward by the prosecutor, Karim Khan, to justify his arrest warrant application, they were based on reports that were assessed on the basis of incomplete information and that have been subsequently debunked. Even the FRC review of the IPC reports has indicated that they were wrong to suggest that starvation was at issue. And in fact, deliveries between January and April 2024, which was the relevant period for those reports, was such that there were 3,268 calories per day going into the Gaza Strip, which is 50% more than what is required under the Sphere guidelines for humanitarian food to conflict-affected persons. Now, what we didn't see in the prosecutor's application was any reference to the critical problems here. Diversion by Hamas and the distribution of aid, which is frustrated when Hamas attack aid convoys. This is also a matter of public record. Aid organizations on the ground have been frank that their efforts have been frustrated by Hamas's theft. Individual civilians while cursing Hamas in the interviews I read out earlier, have been clear that their aid is being stolen by Hamas. And yet we have this moral inversion perpetrated once again, where the Jews are being accused of withholding aid. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. From the outset, Israel has been providing humanitarian assistance. Even before the 7th of October, of course, a great deal of aid was put through to the Gaza Strip, through the Erez crossing, through Kerem Shalom, and through various others. But importantly, well, I see I'm at time. There's so much more to say, ladies and gentlemen. I'll save it for the next occasion.
You will have an opportunity. Mr. Uygur, you have 3 minutes to respond.
That is an amazing Alice in Wonderland version of events, where Israel does not control the borders of Gaza. Israel does not control what food or medicine goes into Gaza, but apparently the dead leaders of Hamas do. It is absurd on its face. It's, to be honest, insulting. She's insulting you. She's saying, I can get you to believe that Israel is not in control, that the Palestinians are in control. And I can get you to believe that you should not have moral equivalence between one side having one person killed and the other side having 30 killed, that the one is worse than the 30, that the one is worse than the 30. So I purposely used the IDF's numbers, which I find to be preposterous, because I knew that she would, as they do every single time the people defending Israel, say the same smokescreen, by the way. Again, I hate this and it breaks my heart. And now I realize it. I didn't realize it back then, that I used to use. We would say, oh, those are Armenian numbers. Of course they're going to inflate the numbers. Just keep disputing the numbers, disputing everything. If you just dispute. But here's the problem, guys. We all see it. You could go home, you could go on any of the social media right now, and you could see the starving children. And they look just like other death camps throughout history. But she says, don't worry, they have a decent calorie intake. I'm sure that that's greatly comforting to them. Now let's go to what the United Nations says. And by the way, her defense will be, I reject anything that isn't from Israel. I reject the United Nations. I reject every press organization. I reject every human rights group. I reject, of course, the Palestinians because they don't even exist. And you see how that's their fault. So, but for the rest of the planet, we all see the same exact thing. So the United Nations says that 20% of the population is facing catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity involving, quote, an extreme lack of food, starvation, and exhaustion. Over and over again, every single time they are breaking record after record while they claim, well, we're doing all we can. So 116 journalists killed. Committee to Protect Journalists says it is the worst of the 21st century. More deadly to journalists than any other war since they have been keeping track. Reporters Without Borders says it is intentional. 75% of all journalists killed in 2023 are Palestinians. 74 healthcare workers at a bare minimum, and 24 humanitarian aid workers. And every single time they say not intentional, doesn't count. I don't believe the numbers. But here I use IDF numbers. I couldn't be any more fair. And she mentioned, and you might not have gotten it, this guy named Mossab, who called me a parasite in another debate. And so she says, do not report on the death, the destruction of those poor kids, because you will offend me. You will hurt my feelings. Well, that brother, who's an Israeli agent, called me a parasite and then said people in the West will fall if they criticize Israel. So I, too, am offended. Now we're even.
The issue of proportionality has been raised a few times by Mr. Uygur. The ICC prosecutors seek an arrest warrant for Mr. Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant for certain war crimes and crimes against humanity. Under Rome Statute, Article 31C, a person who acts reasonably and proportionately to defend themselves or others may be absolved of criminal responsibility. Moreover, proportionality finds parallel principles embedded in other Rome Statute standards implicit, for example, in a charge of extensive destruction not justified by military necessity. Have Israelis ordered disproportionate or militarily unnecessary strikes in Gaza? What is an acceptable proportion of deaths of civilians versus combatants? And does the proportionality or military necessity calculation change if the armed threat is seen as existential or genocidal? And I will address that first to Ms. Hausdorff.
Well, I'm glad to be able to help with a proper definition of the principle of proportionality in international humanitarian law, because it is probably the most misrepresented issue in international law in history. Proportionality requires that the reasonable military commander weigh up the anticipated civilian or collateral damage of a strike against the anticipated military advantage. It is on a case-by-case basis. There is no magic formula, which is why throwing casualty figures out is deeply unhelpful, especially if they're false ones, as we've heard so far this evening. But it is not an effects-based analysis. The principle of proportionality requires an intention-based analysis and to weigh up the anticipated civilian collateral damage against what is anticipated as a military advantage from that strike, one that is necessary. The reason that I say with confidence that no one here is able to make an assessment and answer that question is because none of us have access to the information that is input to make the determination and the proportionality assessment on strikes. But I'll tell you who does have that information. The Military Advocate General Corps of the Israeli Defense Forces, the military lawyers who sit and make every proportionality call and approve strikes in advance. And that information has also been shared with my government in the United Kingdom and your government here in the United States. And each of those entities have also said that Israel is not in violation of international humanitarian law and that its targeting and proportionality approaches are satisfactory. So if the IDF lawyers who sit outside the chain of command so that they are able to make those calls on strikes to more senior officers than themselves, they are answerable to the Attorney General. And we all know the robust legal system that the state of Israel employs. If the IDF Military Advocate General Corps, the United States and the United Kingdom, amongst others, are satisfied, then I would suggest that we can put to bed the misinformation that we have heard so far this evening. I'll ask one final question in relation to what has been alleged in terms of caring about the Palestinian civilians and the suggestion that Israel controls all of Gaza's borders, which it certainly does not. Until recently, of course, the Egyptians controlled the Rafah crossing. And when I was there, I saw the enormous tunnels through which Hamas was able to arm itself under Egyptian command centers. Where are the calls for Egypt to open its border and provide humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians across the border, in the Sinai, in Egyptian Rafah, where they can be provided with assistance without diversion to Hamas and in compliance with Egypt's obligations under international law, its obligations that it signed up to under the African Union Convention on Refugees. That is why I say that the term parasite is applicable, because if people actually cared about Palestinians as I do, they would have been calling from October 2023 for Egypt to facilitate that so that these Palestinian civilians can be provided for.
3 minutes to respond.
Amazing. I think she just called me a parasite again, but she's the humanitarian one. Okay, that I didn't expect that kind of hostility. It's fast. It's amazing. Okay, so let's keep correcting her errors. I can match that hostility. So exactly as predicted, what did she do? She said, none of the other numbers count. Did you hear what she said? You can go back and watch it on tape. Only the Israeli military numbers count. Imagine if other nations that had committed genocide said the same thing. Well, the Armenian numbers don't count. The press numbers don't count. The human rights groups don't count. Only the Ottoman Empire's numbers count. They would be laughed out of the room, and of course they should be. Only the Italian numbers count. Only the German numbers count. And she says it with a straight face. All of the international press are all anti-Semites. They're all liars. The Palestinians are not occupied. The border is not controlled. You're to believe all of these absurdities. So the one border that was not controlled is now controlled. Now she's mentioned Egypt. She says, why don't they open their border? And then the Palestinians can be ethnically cleansed. Oh, I'm sorry, moved into the Sinai, into the desert, where they can stay permanently. And that way, conveniently, we have perfectly ethnically cleansed them, exactly as several cabinet ministers have said. Ben-Gvir has said it. Smotrich has said it. They're not shy about it. They're saying it very, very clearly. We would like them to move out of Gaza. We'd like to push them out. And then at that point, we have it. I mean, Egyptians should also be humanitarians. So, you know, it's interesting because, again, the Srebrenica example is a good one. During the starvation, what they realized during the middle of the genocide, what they realized was one of the soldiers reported at the United Nations on trial, we realized eventually that the starvation was a better method than just killing them. He called it a slow death camp. And he said that the other good part of it, the helpful, productive part of the starvation was it would force them to go get food. And when they went to get food, it would be easier to kill them. And that set me aback because it reminded me of the flour massacre. So here's the food. We control the borders. We barely let any food in. Oh, there's some food. Go get it. And then the Israeli tanks fire on them. And again, they murder those kids. And they murder those moms and those dads. And then they say, no, don't worry, their calorie intake's okay. And they should never be allowed to exist. We should occupy Gaza and West Bank, and we should go ahead and, as they are suggesting right now, we should annex them. But trust me, this is about my right to defend myself. Every single genocide perpetrated, the group that perpetrated it said it was to defend themselves. Literally every single one.
All right, my final question is not about law per se, but about the consequences on the ground of the ICC's engagement in this situation. What have been, or what do you expect to be the consequences of the ground, if any, of the ICC's engagement? For example, has the ICC engagement in this situation deterred international crimes in the region? Can the ICC's action help facilitate peace in the region? Or is the ICC engagement more likely to complicate efforts at peacemaking? Is it likely to induce Israel to prosecute its own commanders and leaders so as to avoid the admissibility of cases against Israelis? And I will address this first to Ms. Hausdorff.
This all depends on what the pre-trial chamber does with the application that's before it. And that I'm not going to preempt. But what I can say is that the approach that has been taken by the previous prosecutor, by this prosecutor, by the pre-trial chamber so far, is deeply, deeply damaging to the rule of law and to the credibility of the International Criminal Court. We have seen this in its failure to apply international law properly, and this also concerns the law regarding the status of the property. Again, there was a lot of misinformation already this evening on that. The principle of uti possidetis juris, which was referenced in submissions to the International Criminal Court all the way back in 2020, and has been also referenced very importantly in the dissenting judgment of the Ugandan judge, Sebutinde, the vice president of the International Court of Justice, separate proceedings. Why is that important? Because it tells us that a proper application of the international law puts the lie to everything we have heard about Palestinian territory and this notion that there is a Palestinian state. Don't mistake me, there is Palestinian self-determination, they have self-governance. In the West Bank, they have self-governance in the Gaza Strip also since 2005, and we have seen the consequences of that. There was reference to the Knesset vote recently. Who, in their right mind, would wish to create a state through which the 7th of October might be perpetrated over and over and again? One side of the table has called for that this evening, ladies and gentlemen. So while downplaying the atrocities that Hamas has committed, while promoting their falsehoods in relation to the casualty figures that they have invented for a significant part, and there are independent studies you can look up about the inflation of casualty figures. One example, the Al-Ahli hospital strike, which of course turned out not to be a strike on the hospital, but on the hospital car park, and turned out not to be an Israeli airstrike as had been widely reported, but in fact a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket that fell short. As so many of these rockets aimed at Israeli civilians so frequently do, falling short in the Gaza Strip and killing indiscriminately. Again, haven't heard anything about that. Nothing about the crimes of Hamas against their own people. That incident alone, Hamas claimed there were 500 casualties as a result of a strike that didn't even hit the hospital, and that figure has never been revised. So I urge you to be circumspect with respect to the falsehoods that you have been provided with this evening even, jet lag. But the important thing for you all to remember is that whatever comes out of the pre-trial chamber, the riding roughshod over international law that we have had up to this point will have dire consequences, not just on the ground in the Middle East, but also for non-state parties like the United States. And we all need to take this very seriously as a result.
Mr. Uygur, you have 3 minutes to address the question of what have been or what do you expect to be the consequences on the ground, if any, of the ICC's engagement in this situation.
Yes. First of all, I think she just said that I called for more October 7th. I mean, Alice in Wonderland's got nothing on what's happening in this conversation. I mean, you guys heard this entire proceedings. Did I ever say that? In fact, I said the exact opposite. I said, I'm horrified by what happened on October 7th. I'm asking for something really, really simple. For you to be horrified by what happened on October 7th and what has happened after October 7th. Is that too much to ask? And again, using IDF numbers, 30 times the number of civilians killed. Now, we talk about proportionality because it's so important to this conversation. That's why she doesn't want you to believe the numbers that every press organization has confirmed. Not only are there 43,391 Palestinians killed at a minimum, but there are 11,000 women, 16,456 children killed. I want you to think of 27,000 women and children, either in a stadium or maybe in an open field, and they're all dead. And Israel says, no, we did not intend it. And it was proportional. It was proportional. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe the numbers. Don't believe reality. Only believe what the Israeli military says. So, by the way, she's also not correct when she said, well, if we empower them and then next thing you know, they'll attack us. That's exactly what they said about Egypt right before the peace deal. And it was the best thing that's ever happened to Israel. Egypt never attacked again. It never coalesced the Arab nations again. The peace deal worked. Peace works if your intent is peace. But if you reject peace and you say the other side can never have a state, well, then you don't want peace. And then right afterwards, when they say we're going to annex the land now, their intent becomes crystal clear. So what would I do? I would do the same exact thing as Srebrenica. I don't need Radić's or any other war criminals' permission to arrest them. That's not how it works. Guess what? The Serbs also did not give the ICC permission to arrest them. Nevertheless, they were arrested. So would I arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich? Absolutely. And I hope that they would spend the rest of their lives in prison for all of the people that they have viciously killed, for their political greed and the great crimes against humanity that they have committed. I know that it's not realistic in this world controlled by the United States, and they have so much overwhelming power, so they will continue to go into Syria and Lebanon and provoke and take more land, while all the world claiming they are the victims, that they are David and not Goliath. But everyone on planet Earth can see they are Goliath. They are the ones occupying the Palestinians for 57 brutal years. And I ask you, please, can you let my people go?
So each of the speakers has asked for 1 minute to respond to what was just said. We'll start with Ms. Hausdorff.
The difficulty, of course, in relying on the General Assembly for the creation of a state is that the General Assembly doesn't have that power. It is a political body, not a legal one, and that is not how states come to be. The Montevideo Convention criteria I referenced earlier are a settled, very basic aspect of statehood in international law. There is a big debate about recognition, but that is not sufficient. And that is at the core of the difficulty with jurisdiction here. But there is another very important problem with what we've just heard about the original decision, which both of the commentators referenced from 2021. And that is that the court referenced an accession document. In fact, the former prosecutor indicated that the state's party to the Rome Statute had accepted the accession of the so-called State of Palestine. That was referenced on the basis of an accession document having been circulated, but through the investigations of UK lawyers for Israel, it has become apparent that it was never carried out. There's another fundamental plank of the pretrial chamber's decision in 2021 that is simply based on false information. And the reason we should be so careful about lauding supposed investigations into these alleged crimes, these false allegations, is because of the false information that has already been put to the court in the context, including in this context of this allegation of starvation. And that has been shown, again, by UK Lawyers for Israel. I'd advocate, because there's too much detail to go into, for you all to have a look at those submissions, which are on our website.
So in terms of jurisdiction, I can't add anything to the person who ruled that Israel could not be held in jurisdiction, and then, because of what happened later, said, yes, the United Nations does have jurisdiction. How can I possibly add to that? And you can't ask for someone to be more unbiased than the guy who ruled saying that Israel could not be held liable before. And now he says they can because of the rules. So I can't add anything to that. In terms of the genocide, since October, Israel has been blocking aid into northern Gaza, and that is what's caused what I read to you before, the 20% acute malnutrition, which we colloquially call starvation. No one disputes that they greatly limited the number of aid trucks coming in. There were 100, and then there was a terrific point about the port. If Israel is allowing easy access for aid, why did the ally of Israel, the United States, have to build a giant port to circumvent Israel if it's not blocking aid? So that right there settles the issue entirely. But there's so much more. I mean, 100 American doctors come back from after serving in Gaza and say an extraordinary percentage of headshots for children. Children coming in every day with chest shots and headshots. Snipers killed an American journalist there. Again, extraordinary percentage of journalists killed, most in the world. You might have all heard of the story of Hind, a 5-year-old girl. And Israel is told she's there. Do not kill her. We're sending an ambulance. They had already killed her family members. They go there and they kill her and everyone in the ambulance. Intent.
All right. At this point, we're going to take questions from the audience. When you are called on, I ask that you please stand, identify yourself and your affiliation, and then ask your question. First hand I saw was Haus.
So a significant reason for the founding of the International Criminal Court was the global call to end impunity for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole by holding individuals accountable. These crimes include the crime of aggression, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and of course genocide, many of which Israel has been accused of. Certainly, just to add to the discussion of starvation, we know from the special rapporteur
Question, please.
on the right to food that Palestinians made up 80% of those experiencing starvation by December of 2020. So if we're going to ignore the ICC...
Holly, do you have a question?
I do.
Please state it.
So the ICC ruled in 2021, as we know, that Palestine is a state for the purposes of the statute. And they even referenced Article 21, the applicable law, which gives priority to the wrong statute.
Last chance, Holly. Ask a question, please.
To treaties such as the Oslo Accord. So for those that are rejecting the court's ruling and for others that are speaking, what international forum would be appropriate to hold trials for Israelis accused of relevant crimes, given that in Israel, under 1% of the Israeli army probes yield prosecution, which leave little expectation for the principle of complementarity to be met domestically.
Thank you.
Well, even if one were to disregard the absence of jurisdiction, the answer to your question is complementarity. It's in the Rome Statute.
The question was what international forum would be appropriate.
Yes. And the answer is complementarity. It is in the Rome Statute, which means the appropriate forum is that of the local jurisdiction, which are the Israeli courts, which are willing and able, the language that is adopted here, to investigate and prosecute any credible allegations. The problem with the allegations that we've heard this evening is that they are simply not credible. Now, I've referenced the blood libel of ethnic cleansing and genocide, but I don't know how many people here actually realize where the blood libel has originated. In the Middle Ages, the accusation was the same, that Jews were killing Christian children. In that case, it was to use their blood for a religious ritual, and it was widely believed. The allegations that we're hearing this evening of targeting children, which are preposterous, these are the modern blood libel, of executing a plan of starvation, which is flatly proven to be entirely false by any proper assessment of the volume of aid that is going in. The people making these allegations don't care about the facts. They are propagating the same age-old anti-Semitic tropes as we have seen for hundreds of years. They don't care about the data put out by COGAT. They don't care about the numbers that the IDF puts out. They say they're not credible, but they fail to acknowledge that the Israeli state authorities are held to account by that very same legal system. That legal system that operates in the only democracy in the Middle East.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.